it's on. Clip it in and put it in your pocket somewhere. Just don't switch it off.
Just in there.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's not fine.
Wait.
Oh, wrong way.
Just screw that up. No, try it.
Put it in there.
Yeah, just. To see if. Yeah. Okay. I usually put it in my back pocket or something. We've got to wait another minute before it starts. Are you going to tell nasty stories about me chasing you? No?
I'll mention you. You'll get a mention.
I get an honorary mention. Is that all I get?
Well, I figure I'd better not waffle on for too long.
If you said tell 30 stories or whatever, say right at the end when the time is expired, they won't record it.
The crazy German.
Crazy German, yeah. All right. So I apologize that the other screen isn't working. It's technology. Technology and I never get along, so you might have learned by now. I'd like to introduce you all to Mike Mackey. We go back a long, long time, all the way to JCU, when we both still had lots of hair and we were still young. He works here as a senior scientist, something like that, for RPS, a big international consulting and engineering firm. And I've asked him to come and talk to you a little bit about his interesting work on fisheries and the future of energy, which is offshore wind farms. Mike, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So it's been a long time since I've been here. 94 to 1998, I did my PhD, Department of Zoology there. Professor Bob Black, who's long since retired. If you've been up to Ningaloo and you've ever gone fishing, you might have caught a little fish like this called Chinaman cod. That's what I did my PhD on. So I can tell you all about that as another story. After that, I went and worked at the Department of Fisheries as a senior fisheries scientist for about 12 years or so, and then after that I got into the marine consultancy game. And before that, I was over at James Cook Uni doing my honours and undergrad in Townsville there, and that's where I met Dirk. He was a lowly PhD candidate at the time, and I was an even lowlier student doing a lot of volunteer, as much volunteer work as I could do at the time. And I really recommend you try and do that if you're sort of trying to work out what you want to do at the end of all this, because it just gives you a little taster of what different sort of research is happening without the responsibility of being paid and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I really recommend looking out for any opportunities there. So with the company I work for, RPS, I've been with them now about 6 years. Well, I've been with them a long time before that, in fact, doing little bits and pieces of work during my PhD days and everything. But we typically, our sort of bread and butter stuff has been impact assessments and going environmental approvals for oil and gas in particular. Like say if a company wants to do a seismic survey somewhere, or there might be a development along the coast. Our expertise in understanding, how to go about the process of getting government approval for that. More recently, we've gotten into the offshore wind game, and which is only just started up in Australia. Well, the marine offshore wind aspect. There are sort of onshore terrestrial wind farms around the place. If you've travelled up the coast, you would have seen a few. But the offshore wind game is a real different thing from the onshore. much bigger turbines, much bigger wind farms, much bigger capacity, and it's all part, it's all a very integral part of the, federal government's drive for net zero emissions by 2050. So it's a real game changer, and we've gotten in, right on the ground floor with it, with a company called Star of the South. Google them later. They're over in the Gippsland. They came in to Australia, and most of the entities behind the offshore wind farm development, it's funded by overseas money because you need big bucks for that sort of caper. Star of the South, yeah, they're the same. They came in even before there was any regulation. The Australian government's quite behind the rest of the world. I mean, thanks to the previous government, So we're playing catch up now. When Star of the South started looking at it in the Gippsland, Victoria, there wasn't any regulation at all. No act to govern what happens in the offshore wind space. So, there's a lot of catch up at the moment. But RPS, we got in from on the ground floor, and we've really developed a lot of expertise in the area. And my particular role, given my background of fishing, and actually when I first left, my first job was on commercial boats, fishing boats. So, given my fishing experience and fisheries experience and my PhD and all that, my focus is on the impacts to fish and to the fishers. We've got other colleagues of mine who are working in this space. They do impact assessments on the marine mammals, on seabirds, obviously a big one. There's benthic habitat. There's a whole broad scope, but my focus is fish and fisheries. So a little bit more about the offshore wind industry. So as I said, it's very new. The way the government's regulating it is the development of it all is they are identifying and releasing certain areas of seabed that they've looked at and identified as being firstly conducive and favourable for offshore wind. I mean, you need to have a pretty good amount of wind flowing through, for instance. So a lot of them are on the south coast. There's 6 they've established. The Gippsland is the one here, these green areas. So this is the Gippsland. I'm off over there next week, in fact. And the green areas are the areas where they have identified that companies can put wind farms in, okay? Then there's suddenly a mad scramble, these companies, saying, right, we want to put a wind farm in this place. And that's when they involve us and say, well, they might be from overseas. And they go, right, we've got a stack of money. We want to put a wind farm in somewhere, but we've got no idea where to do it. So we do an initial due diligence process, and then we say, right, these areas are good. You'll see how it's all a bit funny shape. That's because the government said, right, you can't put a wind farm through there because that's a major shipping lane, for instance. And then there are other sort of considerations. This is another one they've just released in the hunt of the Illawarra. It's a bit funny shaped here. It was closer, but they've carved out all this area because Defence have they don't want wind farms in this area here because there's an important sort of Air Force, Army, whatever the Air Force are, yeah. Somewhere there, all right? And there's something else here, I'm not quite sure, but it's made this really funny shape. But the point is that they've identified these areas where wind farms can happen. There's 6 of them. Eventually, we're hoping they'll, come over here. We think there will be one, probably down Bunbury way, all right? So we're just a bit closer home for us to work. I'm having to fly over to Gippsland quite a bit. Got another one in Portland that's sort of in draft form. When they release these, they have to put them out to the public for public comment, and then they'll sort of approve it officially. Yeah. This is basically what an offshore wind farm, the guts of it. There's one probably over in Europe, or off the English coast where they're really going gangbusters with this stuff. Basically, you've got your turbines, which typically in relatively, down to about 50 or 60 metres water depth, they're hammered into the seabed, so they're pile driven in. And, you may have the one for Star of the South, for instance, they're talking about 200 of these turbines. And with the capacity to provide Victoria with 20% of its power, so pretty significant and that's just one wind farm. Although I think they've had to reduce it a bit now, but anyhow. Then you have cables connecting all the turbines, that's carrying the electricity that's generated by the turbines to an offshore substation where it gets converted and then transferred to the onshore facilities where it gets fed into the local grid and that sort of thing. Okay, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. You've obviously got vessels running around the place as well. So the key let me see. So that's the general plan. Now, obviously, you think, okay, offshore wind, it's a great thing, we're reducing, reliance on non-renewable resources, and it is a good thing. It is definitely a good thing, but it's not all good. I mean, anything we do has an impact, okay? So that's where we come in. That's where we have to, on one hand, the government sort of pushing the need for this, and everyone, society wants these, us to move away from non-renewable resources, but we also have to be looking and considering what the impacts are, particularly on protected species like whales. The Gippsland, for instance, right in the middle of it overlaps a white shark nursery. White shark are a protected species. Okay, so we have to be very diligent about protecting them. You harm one, then you're you are non-compliant with regulation. So it's quite a big thing, all right? So you've got these competing things where, government and society want these to happen, but there's also the local community. I mean, putting a wind farm up there in your sort of backyard is not a good thing, so there's a lot of social issues to consider. Hammering them into the seabed creates a whole lot of noise. And if you're a fish that can't move away from that noise, it's going to really impact you. I mean, there's a lot of dredging happen that is going to cause seabed disturbance. There's a whole, to be honest, there's a whole fundamental change in the type of habitat there, because you're going, in most cases, these are flat, featureless bits of seabed. There may be a little bit of reef here and there, but not much. Often, typically, particularly in the Gippsland, it's just sediment, a lot of sediment, soft sediment. But they want to put 200 of these turbines. These turbines are like 2 metres across in diameter. They want to put 200. It's like putting a whole forest of trees in, And it's, about 200 of these. They're going to grow all sorts of algae and everything on them. They're fundamentally going to change the type of seabed habitat in the area. Right. And it's not just on the seabed, it's extending all the way up through the water column. Okay, so quite significant. Going to change current regimes, that sort of thing as well. Okay, so this is what we need to consider as part of our role in the whole game of undertaking impact assessments and getting approvals for this. And I've got a list here of some of the and I've already mentioned some of the impacts. Electromagnetic fields is another one. Okay, these cables, which are running between all of the individual wind turbines and getting grouped together and coming up into the offshore processing facilities, they emit electricity. Not a lot, but they emit electricity. So if you're a ground-hugging gummy shark or something, or ray that's snuffing along, because sharks and rays are particularly sensitive to this thing. You're going to, we really don't know how it's going to affect them. In fact, there's a lot of uncertainty around this stuff. So, but we need to consider it and go, right, look in the literature, what sort of studies have been done on this sort of thing? Do we need to sort of undertake our own studies? How much uncertainty in our capacity to assign an impact to this do we have? So these are the sort of challenges we're facing. Yeah. So, another one I've got here, IMS, invasive marine species. These things are going to be a whole new structure. We're going to be bringing in vessels from overseas, potentially with all sorts of dodgy stuff on them, introduced marine species that could get established in the area, and that could have consequences as well. Again, in ways that we really can only anticipate, but not have a huge amount of certainty at the moment. And that's the fish, okay? It impacts the fish, and it's going to vary between the fish. Some fish, if you're a little side-attached critter, you're not going to be able to move away, so you're going to really feel the full force of the impact. Whereas if you're a larger snapper or a gummy shark or, these fish that are mobile, you may move away, So you'll move out if the noise, if they start pile driving, you're going to go, wow, so this is too loud for me, I'm going to bugger off. They may come back, we assume they come back, but that's going to impact fishes, okay? The catches are going to drop, potentially. They go out and fish and the fish have buggered off, well, you're not going to get them in your net, so, and that's where we have to consider the impacts of fishers, and and the impacts on the species they're catching. Yeah, good segue into the impacts of fishers, because it's not just the loss of catch. There's also the fact that once these things are in place, if you're a gill netter with a 6 kilometre long gill net, you're not going to be able to run it anymore in between all these turbines, So you've suddenly lost a bit of fishing ground there. Conversely, this is where it gets a bit complicated. If you're a line fisher or a wreck angler, and they're I can tell you the wreck anglers fishing in the Gippsland area are going, this is going to be great. There's 600 fads out there you've just put in, there's going to be pelagic fish, yellowtail kingies and sun bluefin tuna are going to be going gangbusters out there because of all this new structure. So they're going, this is really good, as long as we can fish around there, and that's a whole new thing as well. The wind farm operators have got to consider, do we want, crazy wreck anglers around these things fishing and all this sort of stuff, So there's a whole debate going on around that. But certainly in my role as, trying to minimise the impacts to fishers, I'd go, yeah, you should, should be able to share the waters and all this sort of stuff. So a lot of debate on this. And that, you can have a look at this. I just pulled this out as convenient out of this document here, which Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, the Q. Sorry,
no. Just with your saying that fishers should be allowed to share the fishing farm, not the fishing farm, the wind farm, wouldn't that pose a safety hazard though for them?
Yep, good point, very good point. And when I say they should be able to, some can't. Some clearly can't. Like if you're a trawler, you're not going to be able to trawl along because just the distance between things, turbines, and also along the seabed, there's cables running and all this. Might be covered up with rock and all that, but your nets are not going to like that. Same with the gill netter. But others can. Like I said, the line fisher trolling between these things, they should be able to. But that's a good point, and that's what makes the safety side of it and who's responsible and all this sort of stuff is, drives the lawyers of the wind farm companies, doesn't make them sleep well at night. So, but then again, you say, well, if we put lights on these things and advertise their location, it's not like they're hard to see. If you run into it, well, that's your fault. So, but it is a lot of legal, because it's all new, it is, there's a lot happening in that space, but it's a good question. So initially, actually, the initial thought is no, you can't go in there at all. But when you look at overseas, say in the US and that sort of stuff, they're really moving towards, hey, we can't just lock this area up. And so you look at that area, you know, of the wind farm before. You know, that's a lot of the Gippsland area. If wind farms were to be dotted through all of that, you know, Lakes Entrance is a very important fishing port. You know, lot of history, you know, historical fishing. If you look at all that up, no way. I mean, the fishermen are not going to let you do that anyway. And there's no way you could, really. So it's just not, you know, as an impact assessment, you have to demonstrate you're minimising the impacts. You can't say we can avoid the impacts. You can't, you know, you're always going to have some impact. But you've got to do your darnest to minimise them.
How close is that to, like, the shore?
Yeah, that's 10 nautical mile. So it's in, it's in Commonwealth waters. So most of the impacts are in Commonwealth waters. You can't get away from having some impact in state waters though, because the cable's eventually got to run ashore. So it's got to run through.
Do the turbines have lights on them?
Yeah, they'll have lights on the top there. Yep. I better keep an eye on the time. Sorry, Dirk, I'm waffling there. Okay, to do an impact assessment, what you need to do, it's sort of the same principle, whether it's oil or gas or whether it's a wind farm or whether it's just you know, some new port they're looking at doing in Coburn Sound, say Westport. You know, you basically need to understand what what you are doing. You know, what you are hoping to, you know, develop. You know, in this case, a wind farm. Okay, so you need to know, right, how many wind turbines are we looking at doing? What's the power they're going to be generating? How big are they going to be? How much, you know, what's the sort of details of the pile driving to get it into the seabed, you know, so they need to do all sorts of geophysical and geotechnical surveys of the seabed to understand how they're going to have to hammer it in. You know, how big are the rotors? I mean, if you're doing impact assessment on seabirds, it's huge, you know, information, all that stuff. You know, what's the life cycle of it? How long's the construction period going to be? Because, you know, these things have, you know, typically a 2 or 3 year construction period, then they may be in operation for 30 or 40 years. They're there for a long time. And then after that, you've got the decommissioning aspect of it. So you need to know all of that, and it's a very tricky thing to do because it's such a new and evolving technology that, given the time frames, the wind farms the wind turbines that we're dealing with now will be obsolete by the time the thing gets started. So you have to, as our impact assessment, we have to think ahead to what the sort of turbines that aren't even in existence at the moment. So we've got to, you know, which is a tricky thing to do. You know, how deep do we have to bury the cable? All this sort of stuff, you know, is what we need to. And then we have to say, right, we know what, you know, we've got an idea of what we're going to do in the area, but what is in the area now? What's what we call the existing environment? And that's where we have to undertake a whole lot of surveys. And this is a really interesting part of the process for the likes of me, because we have to get out there in our boats and do all sorts of surveys. In terms of the fish, we've got a impact. We've got a. I'll just flick back to the. Oh. Star of the South is here. I've been doing a lot of surveys there over the last few years. We've got another one just starting off here, and this summer's going to be really crazy for me. We've got working with Deakin University over there, who specialise, as UWA do here, in use of bruvs. You know what bruvs are? Stereo bruvs, stereo baited remote underwater videos. Okay, tried and tested and, you know, accepted sort of method. So we're going to be working with Deakin. They're going to be starting a summer campaign in February. And they'll do another survey in mid-year, so get a winter-summer sort of comparison. They'll be whacking in a whole lot of bruvs over a 2-week period in February. working with CSIRO to put out an array of acoustic receivers that will stay in place for at least 2 summers, so you know, really year and a half. And what they do is listen out for acoustically tagged white sharks. Okay, a lot of white sharks over. That's the eastern population of white sharks, different from the ones that we deal with. They run up here, they'll run over to New Zealand, but New South Wales fisheries in particular are pretty active in tagging them, so we'll listen out for those. To understand their movement patterns within the wind farm area, which is just a little dot on the map. But it's about 700 square kilometres, so it's a sizable area. So we'll put the array out there and we'll leave that in, working with CSIRO guys. The other thing that I've developed a new survey technique, or newish, I mean, well, it's a variant of sort of existing techniques, I guess, that I sort of was doing at fisheries when I was at fisheries, and that's a pelagic using a combination of vessel acoustic sounder and along with putting in pelagic bruvs. So whereas the normal ones sit on the seabed and monitor, you know, demersal fish, this one will sit in, you know, if we run over an area, do a transect at specific sites, we go, right, you know, here's where we're seeing pelagic fish, we'll run back, we'll whack in these these pelagic bruvs, set them at a height in the water column, could be anywhere from 10 to 30, 40 metres in the water column, depending on whether we see the species, you know, the school, to see what it is, and, you know, get an idea of abundance. What else are we doing? We've got, I'm going over next week to talk to commercial fishers, just to understand a bit more about what the seabed and what they're catching there and all this sort of stuff, part of a reconnoitre info trip. And then we'll use that info to to see which species are in the area, you know, which of them are of conservation importance, protected under the EPBC Act. Don't know if you're aware of all these acts. That's the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act is the premier bit of legislation in Australia for protection of marine, you know, specific species, white sharks, whales, whatever, you know, birds, stuff. Okay, so I'll need to know which species in the area are of conservation importance, because we need to do our best to protect those. And then we also need to see which species are of fisheries important, which are targeted, you know. What are the gummy shark, you know, I know, I keep talking about gummy sharks, but I know they'll be in the area because I know that the fishers are targeting them there. So we'll, I'll go, right, you know, with our baseline surveys, when are they coming in, how are they using the area, you know, and use that information to try and minimise the impact. Okay, if they're using this part of the seabed, there's sort of more habitat that's preferred by them in this part of the wind farm area, and they're there in summer, well, I'll be saying to the wind farm operators, you know, don't be hammering in the pylons there and creating a lot of noise in that area in summer. That's how we use the information that we gain from all these fun sort of survey stuff that we're doing. So, we also need to know what the fishers are doing. That's why I'm going over there next month to talk to them. But we also gain information from the fisheries. Yeah, I mean, this is information from. This is taken from a completely different survey, but it just shows. This is. You could imagine that's a wind farm area. It's in fact where a company wants to do a seismic survey, but it could be it's the same thing. We've obtained information on the Pilbara Fish Trawl Interim Managed Fishery that fishes up that way. Okay. we've gotten the data from them and we've plotted it, and then we look at the overlap to get a feel for how much our survey or wind farm or whatever is going to impact that fishery. Okay? And there's a bit of overlap, but it's in an area where there's not much effort. Okay, so there's, you can usually, then it becomes a bit of a judgment call as to how much impact you're going to have on that fishery. Ultimately, it comes down to not just the impact on the broader fishery, but on the individual fishes, because they're the ones that are going to be impacted. I mean, you see here that there's 2 vessels fished in the area, so it's, and that's the process we go through. First of all, you do the high level sort of look. You go, right, with the fishery itself, we're going to impact, we overlap about 5% of the fishery. Not a big, and it's only in an area where not much fishing is happening, so not a big impact in the scheme of things, okay? But for those 2 fishes, they're going to get, this is, that's where I fish. Come on. So, that's where we have to put in other measures to to enable those 2 fishers or anyone who thinks they've fished the area to lodge a claim for compensation. So we've got compensation plans as well. Okay, and that's how we minimise the impact on fishers. There's other things we do as well. We know that fishers are pretty mobile dudes. They can sort of fish around the place. So if we say, and in this case it's a 2-month survey, if we say right to the fisher, say to them, okay, we are going to communicate to you when we're going to start the survey, whereabouts here we are, etc., on a daily and weekly basis. That's giving them capacity to go, okay, well, I'm going to, go out on a fishing trip, but I know the vessel's here, the survey's happening there, I'm not going to go anywhere near that, so they can plan ahead. So they don't go out cold and go, I'm going to fish here, and then they get there, and then on the horizon's this whopping big survey vessel. So, so that's another way that we minimise the impacts. But, often it's okay, but when I know that in the Gippsland, so many wind farms are going to be there that it's going to become, and it's already the fishers in the area, the peak bodies, that are their spokespeople, they're already agitating a lot. They're going, no, Bali's. Star of the South, we were working on Star of the South, didn't have much issue with the fishers. They were okay, fair enough. I mean, and obviously, like I said, some are happy for it, but others, like the gill netters and that, but they're peak bodies, those guys of the trawlers that can't fish in the area, they're starting to get really agitated because they can see they're losing a lot of ground. And quite rightly so. I mean, it's that's been their livelihood. So these are quite big issues that we're working through. Counterbalance that, there's a push by the federal government, net zero, we've got to have these things in the water, so there's these real competing sort of issues to deal with. So, how much time have we got?
We've got 12 minutes.
Holy cow, okay. Well, I've gone through most of it. These are just some of the, there's quite a few more impacts to fishers that we have to consider. I just sort of stepped out a few here. The noise is just some of the key and biggest sources of impacts from the wind farm. One is the pile driving, okay, and I'll just focus on that for a bit. Pile driving, and what we have to do, so once the company that wants to put in the wind farm tell us all about, okay, what sort of size of wind turbines we're going to have to pound in, and we have an understanding of how much force is going to be needed to get it in. We've got the specialist modelers around who can model the extent of the noise from that. Okay, they're quite sophisticated and well-developed models. So we use that modelling to go, all right, this is how far out the noise is going to go, and we use criteria like that's been developed. Say if you're a fish with a swim bladder, how far out is the noise going to travel to the distance within which it's going to damage my odorless. I don't know if you know what fish's ear stones, odorless. They've got sensory hairs on them and all this sort of stuff. They use them for. Dude, no, he'll tell you later. So, so to damage. So we use the modelling to understand the distance out to which fish with swim bladders will be impacted, and also fish without swim bladders, i.e. sharks and that. And sharks and that are less susceptible because they don't have a swim bladder. All right. So it varies. And we also use that for obviously for whales. You know, the impacts to whales, what they call PP. Temporary threshold shifts, noise shifts, and permanent. You know, there's all this sort of jargon. Anyhow, we work out how far out. And then we look at that and we go, wow, that's way too far, without any sort of means of trying to avoid the noise. We go, right, we've got to pull it in. So what do? We look at ways they can use bubble curtains, where when they're pounding in the turbines or the base of the turbines, they run a ring around. They've got a barge there with big compressors on, and they're pumping in the air and it's bubbling up around the turbine, and that's diffusing the noise going through. Okay. In fact, we had to do what they call double bubble curtains on these to try and minimise it even more. Then there's other things we do, like soft starts. So we don't just start, get the big hammer and start whacking it in straight away. We do it slowly, just little taps, slowly building up through time, because that gives the fish that are mobile fish that are sensitive to it time to go, this is getting a bit loud, I don't like this, I'm going to bugger off. Okay, so they move away from the area without getting sort of blasted, So that's another thing we can do. But of course, inevitably, you can't do, you're going to have some impact, particularly on those poor little critters that are side attached, the little wrasses and that, but, Okay, so we accept that we're going to have some impact. And if they're conservation important, like the signated, the pipefish and seahorses, that sort of stuff, well, it's a particular concern because they're protected under the EPBC Act. Okay, I've already gone through a lot of this other stuff. Gone through that. And that's just, in terms of what are our baseline surveys that we're going to be doing. That's a gummy shark there, actually. We need to understand what species are there. That's the paramount, because then that tells us which ones we need to be protecting, because of their fisheries importance or conservation importance. When they're there, and what are they on the seabed? Are they sitting on the seabed? Because they're going to be more impacted by the electromagnetic radiation stuff from the cables, or are they pelagic and less susceptible to that? When are they, and how are they distributed across the wind farm area? These are all very important things that we need to know. And that is just, I've already talked about it. This is just going through the surveys that survey methods. I've sort of talked about that, the use of BRUVs. And that's the BRUV. There's one there. Sure you've all seen them. DNA. eDNA is another one that I forgot to mention. This is a relatively new technique. Like every method that I'm talking about here, they've all got their biases and limitations. Sometimes the people that use them sort of tend to overlook that a bit when you read what they've done. eDNA is a good one though, because, the positive of it is we can take water samples and we can sample for conservation important or rare species that may be of conservation importance, again like the sea dragons and that sort of stuff, but which are really hard to sample for otherwise. If you've been down the Cottesloe looking for a leafy sea dragon, good luck, They may be there, but they're looking like a bunch of weed. It's really hard to see them. So you need really, it's really hard to survey for them. Okay. According to the government, you can they may be in the area, but you really don't know. But you just have to assume they are. But obviously, it'd be good if you could survey for them. But the way you'd have to survey is diver-based, very detailed survey. But in a white shark nursery, forget it. You're not going to jump in the water. So eDNA gives you evidence that they're there, though. Okay, you can sample for it. The problem with eDNA, though, it's a water sample. And you don't know whether that bit of eDNA that you've sampled in the area has come from 100 miles up the coast. It could have just drifted out in the current. So, you know, it gives you some idea, but leaves a few question marks as well. But, you know, we do what we can with what we've got. And that's, I talked about that one, the work with CSIRO. That's the pelagic underwater video and echo sounder method that I talked about. Recreational boat ramp surveys we'll be doing as well, just to see which, you know, the recreational fishery, commercial fishers are relatively easy to get information about because they have to submit all sorts of catch data, and we can access that and sort of look at it and stuff. There's limitations in that. There's all sorts of confidentiality clauses and stuff. But recreational, there's just one mass of dodgy people doing all sorts of stuff, you know. From, you know, the likes of me who go out and never catch anything to those people who just rape and pillage. Okay, so what we need to do is do boat ramp surveys. Just sit there at a boat ramp, say, oh, Fred, you going out, and, you know, here's a map. Do you ever fish this area? What are you catching? What time of year? All that sort of stuff. Get an understanding of what they're doing. And hopefully they don't tell you where to go as you do it. So, and then we use whatever else, other data. There's aerial surveys happening for marine for whales. You know, there's all sorts of other surveys happening. And they'll also give us some information about surface schools. Sunfish are protected. One species of sunfish is protected. We didn't see any of those in our fish focus surveys, but they were seeing them in their aerial surveys, for instance, because they were sitting at the surface. Okay, and that's just a sort of list. I'm probably about done, aren't I?
Yep, a couple more minutes.
Okay, and these are some of the ways we minimise the impacts. You know, burying the cable, quite simple stuff really, you know. Getting it down as far as possible in the seabed so that the EMF that's being emitted is, you know, further away. Minimise construction activities during the spawning period, if they can. I mean, it's quite tricky for them to do that sort of stuff. And you have to remember that they're trying to minimise impacts to whales and birds and everything else. And it's not always convenient to minimise the impact to gummy shark when they've got the whales coming through at that time, you know, so it's a balancing act, you know. So, and these ships that they're bringing in to do the pole driving cost hundreds of thousands of dollars a day. You know, so there's that sort of financial aspect that they have to bring into the mix too. You know, you can't stop because there's a gummy shark coming through, you know, so things like that. Yeah, and I've spoken about that. Oh, the other one is, as worked overseas, if they can't fish in the area, how can they get employed on the project? Already talking to guys who are, you know, like these wind farms are going to be there for decades. So, you know, like what local, and there's a real push, real focus on local employment. You know, it's a win-win then. I think that's about it, though. That is it.
All right. Wow. Good timing.
Oh, thank you.
Questions? Give them a hard time.
Yeah.
How thick does the cable have to be to run like?
Well, yes. Yeah. Yeah, good question. It depends. It depends a bit. And the ones that are running between all the turbines is thinner. And the ones running ashore, it depends on, sometimes they will opt for having multiple, smaller, you know, thinner, narrow. But I'm thinking it's about that thick, that sort of size, typically, but they could be bigger if they're just going less. Yeah, they're well insulated, but it doesn't stop the stuff emitting. No, no, it's sheathed. I'm not sure.
Probably 5 optic or something like that.
I don't even know. That's what I was going to say, but I'm really not sure. Google it. I just know it emits, and it.
But in terms of size, it's what I know about it. It's smaller than the oil pipelines, gas pipelines that they're laying in the oil and gas fields.
Oh, definitely, yeah, definitely.
And they can bury it much deeper because the oil and gas ones have to be all the time inspected for leaks, right? So very often they're shallow or even on the surface.
They can, although that's something, seabed might not be, if there's a lot of limestone and stuff, they can't bury it, so they've got to rock armour it, what they call armour it with rock, which would be good habitat for rock lobsters. But
What's the impact radius of the EMS being produced by the?
not much. I mean, yeah, it's only sort of to background levels a metre.
Oh.
It's not a lot. It's like, they compare it to like the TV emissions, that sort of thing. But if you're a very sensitive shark and there's a whole, that area is going to be crisscrossed with this stuff. So if you're a shark and they're like the gummy sharks, they migrate offshore and onshore. They'll come on in, at least in the Gippsland where I've studied them. They'll pup, do the pupping. They really give birth to live young near shore. So they've got to come through all this, and it might be a little sort of tingle or something. I don't know. I'm not a shark, but a lot of that all the way through. They go, no, I'm going to, bugger off. So there's a lot of uncertainty in this. We need to make judgment calls based on quite a bit of uncertainty. We look in the literature. A lot of the experiments, lab-based, and they're not, with their limitations, and may not be on the species often aren't on the species. So you're trying to, provide a bit of guesswork, and ultimately you go, right, well, and we've got to be conservative in our approach. We've got to assume the worst case scenario. So we'll say, okay, if we assume that it's not good for the gummy sharks and they're not going to come ashore in that area, in terms of the broader population, doesn't matter, And we look at that, at all the available science on the distribution of gummy sharks and where they're pupping and all that sort of stuff. And if it's ends up being a really small part of their broader population area, it's really, you make a judgment call. So it's really not, given all the benefits, it's really of minimal impact and inconsequential if those gummy shark coming in that area are not going to pup properly or something like that, So we've always got to be bringing it back to the bigger picture in terms of the impacts to the population, not just the individuals, and in that area. Yeah.
You said that to sort of for safety reasons, you'd be putting lights on the turbines to make sure that they would be visible.
I'm guessing that actually, but yeah.
With those lights, how would those lights be powered? Would they be powered by their own electricity?
If you go out here at the channel markers out here, you'll see them flashing on and off. They're powered by solar. Yeah, it'd be the same deal. Well, they just have a little cable going up for the turbine. I don't know. Yeah.
Is there much research that has shown this sort of impacts of altered sediment regimes and how that affects? How would you go about minimising the long-term effects
Of this change in.
Does it affect the sort of the beach sediment regime and the wave? Because obviously it might change the wave.
Yeah, it's a good question. That's one reason why they're putting them further offshore as well, to minimise coastal impacts.
Yeah.
Again, it's our assessment of that, just like the pole driving, we use modelling to assess the potential impacts and inform our understanding of it all. We have very smart people who are, who can, and we've got at the moment, as part of the impact assessment or baseline surveys, they've got wave monitors out there. So, they're just bobbing around out there, buoyed. They're collecting all sorts of information on, currents and wind and all that sort of stuff, which will be fed into the models to understand, which way, you know, the current drift and all that is. So, and then they'll go, right, if we put a pylons, you know, in this configuration, how is that going to affect things? You know, the change in currents and everything like that. All right. So they, you know, and then they'll. I mean, it's not my part, my scope, but you know, we've got definitely got people working on that. Yep.
I was sort of wondering, I mean, before putting like those wind farms, could it not like make some sort of little sort of like model thing that sort of generates the same frequency and sort of evaluates what's the impact of the fish's shift, like the fish just dispersing, and see how much it impacts the fisheries?
Yes, yeah. So like I said, we do modelling where convenient, particularly for, you know, things like noise modelling and the oceanic changes to oceanography. But with fish, you know, we understand that they're moving in and well, it's such a big I had a slide up there which sort of gave an indication of what we're dealing with. You know, there's over 100 species. They're so diverse in what they're doing. You know, some are hanging around, some are going, some are just moving, you know, moving through. Some are spawning there, some are not. You know, some are in the water column, some are on the seabed. Some are little, some are big. Some are schooling, some are individual, some are eating others, some are running away from others. So there's all this sort of stuff. And it's really, so which one do you focus on? We do actually focus on particular species because we have a bit more info on it. We call them indicator species. Okay, snapper's a good one, you know, like for instance. There's a lot of information, because snapper is a commercially important species, there's a lot of literature information about snapper. And if we know snapper in there, we can use, right, okay, these are small to medium sized fish. You know, they're benthopelagic, so they're sort of associated with the seabed, but they're sitting off it. They've got a swim bladder. You know, they're sort of this level in the trophic level. We can use those as an indicator of how, you know, the noise and all that sort of stuff would impact other species as well by our understanding based on what we've found, but also what's in the literature to look at other species. So it's kind of modelling it in a sense, but it's just not really a model that is built, and we don't really need it. Given there's such a diversity of things, we can get a good enough understanding. I mean, we use the modelling from the noise, for instance, to inform it. What's going to happen to the snapper? They're going to bugger off. But, yeah.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Great questions. Good luck with everything. What do I do? And if after you've done your honours and all that, you're interested in getting into this space, so give up, yes, we actually do take on students.
Actually, one of my former master students was stolen away by him.
Yeah, and she's really good.
She's good, yeah.
Amy.
And I could never get her back.
Yeah, actually, we're working with. She's over in
She's
Melbourne.
East Coast now, right?
Yeah. But we do